Juhee Lee-Hartford, thank you for making your way here. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been a fan of your podcast, so this is such an honor. I couldn't believe it when you asked.
And here you are, sat in the seat. And so we'll ask you some questions and we'll learn more about you as this goes on. I would like to start with this story. I read a wonderful piece by you, Juhee, The Fortune Teller. And this goes back to the year 2000, 25 years ago. Can you maybe start with this story for us, please?
25 years ago, I came to Korea. It was multi-layered reason. And one, I was burned out as an architect. And two, I really felt the need to come back to Korea. I have immigrated to United States as an 8-year-old, and this is a lot of backstory, but so I had run away from home when I was 16, rejecting everything, all things Korean. And then as I matured, of course, so such cliche, you begin to wonder what your roots had to offer for your identity. And then at the same time, a few years ago, my grandmother had passed away from lung cancer in Jeju. And all of that emotional mix was weighing on me. And so I came here in year 2000 with a Fulbright scholarship. At that time, I had proposed to study residential architecture of then and now because I felt that I was suppressed by my stepmother and my father for being a woman or girl. I wanted to see how that played out in Korean residential architecture of Joseon Dynasty and modern architecture, and what traditions lingered and why. And so, should I talk about a little bit about that fortune teller experience?
Go wherever you want. I'm also curious about rejecting your Korean identity and then coming, because I've heard many people finding it again. But that rejection is also quite interesting, quite personal.
Yes, I felt that the rejection, the Confucianism and the old way of thinking, the old Korean mentality was holding me back from my ambitions, especially, to become an architect. And this was in Queens, New York, tens of miles away from Korea, and it was still tying me down. And so I felt that I had to reject it in order to become an architect and to pursue my career. Otherwise, they're like, oh, why make your life so hard? Just marry a doctor or lawyer and have sons, give birth to sons, and your life will be easier. And I think they're right. Oh, now looking back, yeah.
Yeah.
And that fortune teller experience was so fascinating to me because it was totally impromptu. A friend of mine from Yonsei gathered a bunch of us and said, "Oh, let's go see fortune teller this afternoon after school," because we were going to Yonsei language school at that time. And she said, "Oh, let's just go to see a fortune teller for fun." And the results were quite heavy on me because the fortune teller was saying things like, you write out all that you feel. And at that time, I thought I was going to make a breakthrough on Korean architecture. My research was going to make a breakthrough. And so I'm like, who cares about emotions? Who cares about feelings? And then I kept probing. I'm like, what should I write about? And she said, for example, you should write how you lost your mother. And I was not ready for that. But when I looked back at the time of my mother's passing. It was our last few days living with our grandmother in Jeju. And so I wrote about what that was like. And it was really fascinating realization as I'm writing the seasonal living, the way Koreans use their houses very seasonally, that was revealing. And then when I dug into it deeper, I learned that my mother passed away on the same day as Park Chung-hee. Mm-hmm. Two separate incidences, but my mother died of a freakish acupuncture malpractice. And so she died on October 26, 1979, in the morning. And Park Chung-hee died at night. And then the next day, the whole country shut down. And I thought that, it was very quiet and eerie feeling in the country. And I thought everybody was mourning my mother. Of course,
maybe they were
egocentric.
Yeah.
And it's this very strange feeling. Nobody was going out much and very quiet. And it turned out that he was assassinated that night. And it was very symbolic. They both died with assault to their brain, for example. I felt like, okay, so how, Koreans say, woman is the moon and the man is the sun. And I felt like their deaths were some kind of symbolic eclipse. Mm-hmm. And so I looked into it. I'm like, so who's this man who died on the same day as my mother? And it really opened my eyes to 1960s, 1970s nation rebuilding times. And I really got to appreciate what Korea and Koreans went through to build a nation, from the war, rubbles of the war. So it was really fascinating. And I thought, okay, maybe this is what the 점쟁이 meant, the fortune teller meant. It really gave me a deeper understanding of Korea and Korea's built environment just because of that eclipse. And from personal side, I really felt like my mother was reaching out to me. Like she knew that I was back on motherland, and I felt like she was reaching out to me.
It's wonderful. There is a Korean idea, which is not Western Aristotelian logic, but when the crow flies, the pear falls, and never tie your shoelaces in a cucumber field, because these two completely unrelated events are seen as happening at the same time, and synchronicity and all of these kind of things. So we think about cause and effect in the West, but in Eastern philosophy, they will always say, yeah, there's something connecting them. They believe in sort of like a harmony or a monism. In terms of building the nation, you've mentioned Park Chung-hee and things like this. How do you see Korea through the lens of architecture and buildings, and from then and now? And tell me what you see, please, Juhee.
Oh, thank you. And so, 25 years ago when I was studying residential architecture, Hanok looked all the same to me, at the beginning. Tiled roofs and wood maru, ondol and mud walls. They all look the same to me. And then I somehow got to decode them. And one of that experience was at Chusa Kotek, and that the exact town is slipping my mind right now. Chusa Kotek was residence of a famous artist, Chusa, and that was a lesson in Hanyang, the yin-yang principle of Korean home for example. And so I knew there was like his and her space. I knew that, and I was able to read that. I was told that, typically women's quarters are on the west side, representing the darkness, while the men's quarter is on the east side, representing the sun and the morning. But I didn't realize that really went into the expression of Hanok itself, the architecture itself. So that's where I discovered how, like, the women's quarters were very introverted, and men's quarters were open and receiving guests. But at the same time, fascinatingly, the women's quarters were on the higher ground, which meant that they were the boss, essentially.
I'm married to a Korean woman, I know that.
So there was that constant power play, yin-yang, and they really, I think they tried to strike a balance. And what was also fascinating was that when I was reading this book that my uncle had gotten me, like an antique book on Korean evolution of Korean homes, that this yin-yang has been playing out for thousands of years, and how it manifested in Hanok. It was just really fascinating. For example, in a Neolithic age, the dwellings on Korean Peninsula was a pit dwelling, so they dug deep, and then had like a low thatch roof to give protection from weather and such. And but then as time evolved, there's wondumak, raised like a pavilion to watch over the farm fields, and then eventually, over thousands of years, these two benefits merge, and then finally, the Hanok is raised a little bit, but still they kept the benefit of the earth, like that earthen mud floor with the oil-lined paper. So that touch with the being one with the earth was still there, but they were balancing, constantly balancing yin-yang, yang principles. So another example is like if the outdoor activities was about standing, indoor activities all about sitting, and of course just capturing nature, and the layering of spaces. There's the outdoor courtyard, which is, more enclosed, defined space. And then there's a layer of 뒷마루, or like the perch of the maru. And then there's the semi-indoor, outdoor, like 대청마루. And then 온돌방, so.
That would be the heated room.
Right. And there's just so many different layers as you go from public to semi-private into like indoor, outdoor, blurring the indoor and outdoor, and then completely enclosed in the like heated rooms. It was just so fascinating to me. Yeah.
It's very sophisticated. We might think of them as sort of primitive, or not having all the trappings of a Victorian stately home or something like this, but they're obviously inspired by different concepts, and yin-yang or yang being the one. Does geomancy, feng shui, does that come into it in any way?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that was fascinating as well. I was writing a chapter on it, and it became like 26 pages.
Yeah.
And I said, oh my gosh, I have to pull this back a little bit. And I wrote that chapter a while ago. And I guess I should give a little more background on. So I decided to You know what? Let me pull back a little bit. I set on this journey thinking that I was going to make a breakthrough on Korean architecture observation and write a book about it. And I guess at that time, I don't know what I was thinking in terms of what type of book it would be, whether it was going to be academic book or just some, I guess, architectural book. But it was very strange because when I came back from my Fulbright year, all what kept flowing out of me was just fascinating stories that I've learned, and how my family and history of Korea and people's the way they evolved, how they live, and all of that kind of some personal stories were coming out, and I had to keep suppressing it. And so going back to your question about geomancy, I was wondering if I were going to lose my audience if I go too deep into it, and so I wrote that chapter many years ago, so I don't remember all the details. But of course, what's known in general public is the how you have the mountain set in the back as like a secure backdrop, and then so that is typically preferred on the north side to block the wind and such, and then the cold wind, and then the view and the sunlight should open to the south, and it's optimal if you have a flowing water view or some kind of body of water that towards the south, and there were like the energy of the land, and how like you should get consulted by the geomancy expert on which land is more prosperous to build and why, and if there were some weaknesses, he or she would tell you how to fix it. I guess back then it was more male profession. I don't quite recall. And
no fourth floors in buildings. That was a big surprise to me when I first came 20 years ago. This is not kind of geomancy, but I think it affects houses and residential buildings. Sa being the Chinese character for death and things like that, so they would avoid those. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that there's an idea of qi or energy and yang and these kind of things. And I just wonder, from being so long in Western education in the United States, do you look at those things and go, yeah, they're real, they affect us, or it's cute, it's nice, but it's not real? Like, I know it's a very sensitive question, but these are things that are resonating, I think, around Korea.
Yes, it's a very interesting topic. And because now my study is more expanding to contemporary architecture. Yes, and so the lack of marking the fourth floor, I guess it's like in the United States, not labeling 13th floor. I guess it's a superstition. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the same.
But when I was reading about geomancy, I understood as people trying to make sense of the world and create order when there seems to be constant chaos or what have you. But I did feel that many points were valid, especially when you're living with nature, creating that space, defining a space in wilderness. And the southern orientation on Korean Peninsula is, of course, optimal for solar gain. So to me, most of it was a great practice. There were definitely some maybe superstition, but what's also interesting nowadays is to see how shamanism is influencing, and I'm sure some Korean architects, who shamanism, they shun away from it, most of them. But when I was commenting on a modern, very well-known modern architect's work, I said, "Your work has beautiful colors." And he said it comes from shamanism.
Wow.
And he said it's not just him, but it's just inherent in Korean people, Korean architects. They just are drawn to colors because of that history. It's just subconscious. And there is another modern architect, Moon-hoon, who's very directly expressive about shamanism. And most people I hear think that is strange.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so he's bringing the subversive kind of inheritance, inheritance of Korean culture very forward, and some people shy away from it. They're like, "Oh no, that's too backwards or too strange," So it's fascinating.
What does it look like, the shamanism, or the colors, or when it manifests, when Moon-hoon or these people put it in? What does it look like?
The way
you see it.
the way Moon-hoon interprets it is red, black, and gold, and is very, very stark and very strong presence, and it creates that aura. The colors that I've seen in other architects' work are definitely like that golden glow is there, but colors of what Wudang would wear, even blues and definitely reds and yellows, a variety of colors. Yeah.
They're the colors that I generally associate with shamanism: the red, the yellow, and the blue, and not neon colors, but kind of deep, matte kind of colors. That's how I see them, at least. And they're the red and the blue. Obviously, they're on the taeguk, which is the Korean umyang on the flag.
Right.
And that originally had yellow, so the umyang was red, blue, and yellow, and it was heaven, earth, and the humans all there.
Right.
The colors of the shamans to connect those, the mudang. I'm curious how you see Korean architecture today when you walk around the streets, and you've been walking around the streets to try to find this place, Juhee, but to maybe start this question, I think a lot of people, especially coming from Western Europe or North America, they might come and see these rows and rows of apartment buildings and think, oh, because it looks, I don't know where I'm from, like sort of council flats, where it doesn't look like luxurious living.
Right.
It's quite different here. I'm also interested, when I show my students from Singapore photos of North Korean apartments, they look at me and go, that looks like Singapore.
Oh.
Really interesting to see their reactions. How do you see, from an architectural lens, the country today?
Today, Korean architecture is very exciting. There's such great potential, especially with younger architects who see the value in a nondescript buildings and seeing potential in them. So that's one avenue. But there are just so many different interpretation of what Koreanness is. And I'm loving the diversity, and I hope that will continue because it's just so exciting. So many different interpretation and expression is happening. I am renting a Airbnb in Seoul, and I was just yeah, I know, I lucked out, and I was just walking around, and all of a sudden I saw a coexistence of Hanok and then reinterpretation of Hanok and modern, like a maybe 3 or 4 story building behind in the backdrop with the alleyway. And I'm like, oh, this is Korea. I loved it. And so, a few years ago or maybe a decade ago, the norm was, or even today, I'm sorry, the norm is to just flatten everything and rebuild, which just results in loss of character and I guess corporatization of architecture. But yes, so I see the new generation really appreciating the fabric that is here, which seems to be quite chaotic and rough at times, but they're really making great art, of buildings.
Sochon is a wonderful place. It's one that I recommend to my students because it has old money vibes. It has history in the past combined with the modern, and you can, there's the bookstore from IU's album cover and things like this, and wonderful little hanoks, but also modern trendy cafes. It's this kind of almost like a fantasy Korea. It's what you want it to be, and it's very different from the sort of residential areas, which is very modern and minimalist and technological. Sochon is almost a world unto itself. You've really definitely lucked out by being in Sochon, I think.
Yeah. And I guess since you mentioned these tall apartment buildings, it's really such a phenomenon because it's such an efficient way to live. And I learned, this is what I learned 25 years ago, and Koreans have such a strong identity with the apartment building that they live in. So I don't know if they still do this today, but when they introduce each other, they would say, I am so-and-so from so-and-so apartment building, what floor, that kind of thing, because it really solidified who they are. And of course, there are projects like a high-tech layering of conveniences in apartments, I hear. So, but there are also a group of people who are tired of living in apartments, and so I heard that the private homes were very popular, or still popular, because they want to express who they are individually, and they are tired of living in such a crammed space, so then they would find a good deal on land elsewhere, and some people would even give up working for a year to manage his or her own design and construction of a house. I heard that was a big trend.
Apartments are desirable in Korean, which is one of the things which is quite new to me, because I grew up thinking you want a house with a fence and a yard and a dog and a garden and these things and some land. But a lot of Koreans like apartment living, and it's seen as luxurious because you have all the mod cons. You don't have to worry so much about the water, the electricity, the internet. There's a kyungbi ajoshi, or people that do everything for you.
Right, and daycare could be in the same building, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and lots of convenient shops nearby. Everything is in walking distance.
Yeah.
And I hear that apartments are much easier to sell compared to private homes, and especially private homes that are extremely privatized and personalized. It will be hard to sell,
Yeah. They do reduce our interaction with other people, I think, with the neighborhoods. You were talking about these hanok. Maybe it might be fun to talk a little bit more about them, because I'm sure there are quite a few people that haven't really been into a hanok or even seen a hanok. But you talked about that public space at the start of hanoks, the sort of courtyards that is almost a bridge between the private inner sanctum of the house and then the outside into the village. They became sort of, they're a place to sort of congregate and welcome people and have this. And when we all find ourselves closed off in apartments, it's good and it's private and it's confidential, and we like that. But by the same token, it also, I think, breeds, the sort of bulan, or the anxiety, the discomfort, the alienation and the loneliness. We live around 10 million people and we don't know our neighbor, is kind of a modern phenomenon, I think, with Korean living. Not for everyone, I'm generalizing, but I think that does happen with apartments a little bit.
Yes, that's what I heard. And I know there are some innovative thinking that's happening. This very talented architect, Juhee, for example, she got great recognition for her Songpa apartment, where micro living, where these boxes of very small apartments were interlayered with like shared spaces and mini, like a little theater down below and cafe, and it was great for younger generation. And I heard that once people go into that apartment, they don't want to leave, like they don't want to lose their lease. Because they love it so much, So I think there's definitely a great potential that could happen. Yeah.
How is all of this being received abroad? Because when we talk about Korean movies, critical reception is phenomenal, and Korean music, Korean dramas, Korean beauty, and on and on and on. K architecture, is that a thing? Does that exist?
It's an excellent question. I think the world is becoming more curious. For example, maybe a year ago, Bloomberg Media did a video piece on Korean modern architecture, and it did predict that Korean modern architecture will become the next Hallyu. And at the same time, interestingly, I was with my colleagues at Korean Architects Association of New York. We were putting together a proposal, a retrospective look on Korean modern architecture, from 1950s through modern current times. So we thought, okay, so we must be on the right track. So I think the energy and the curiosity is there. And so when we proposed this exhibition to a major museum in New York City, I can't talk about it too much, but all I can say is that they were curious. They have been curious. And so, they said, thank you for this retrospective perspective, and their calendar is full for next few years, but it seemed that it could be a possibility. Yeah.
Wonderful. I wonder how architecture and space and living has changed over time from your perspective. So going from the sort of, the 50s and the 60s and the poverty, and then this kind of rush to, in some way, our environment shapes us. We shape our environment, but then our environment shapes us, and it's this kind of dialectic. I wonder how you see this sort of over time frames, not in a static moment, but how are our houses shaping us as we shape our houses?
That's a great question. Because Korea, I guess, has such a diverse take on housing. I'm still digesting, but just to give an observation, of course, in the old days, the individual houses were the norm, and then as the apartment grew, or the modernization took over, the apartment became popular. But I heard that the very first apartment building that was built was very uncomfortable, meaning it had no ondor. It was totally Western apartment, and nobody wanted to live there. No, I mean, Koreans. No Koreans wanted to live there. And then the government did some research, and then they started to layer in certain Koreanness into apartments, like ondor, the radiant floor heating, because the apartment didn't have madang, but they really needed that cross ventilation. So the what we call the single loaded corridor, meaning you have just for each corridor, in a stacked apartment, it was more common to have just one row of apartments, meaning in U.S., it's common to have internal corridors and have apartments on both sides of the corridor.
Okay.
But in Korea, it was more common to have that corridor to be more either semi-enclosed, more outdoor space, so that there could be cross ventilation in the apartment. And then, and because they don't have madang, they always had the balcony. And so that way they can get some outdoor space. I think, southern orientation of apartments is preferred, but it's just, it's not always possible because of the urban lot. And some other fun transitional things that would happen is, let's say, Koreans, no matter how modern it got, this was maybe in the 90s thing, no matter how modern their houses were, with the modern couch, everybody sat on the floor. Like they would use a couch as their
backrest.
Yeah. And they would prefer to sit on the floor instead, that kind of thing. And the apartments were developed, to have more extended family options. But now I think it's more evolving to cater to more modern, younger generation, like micro-housing that I just mentioned before. So there's just so much diversity in Korean housing. People wanting to leave apartments and having their own private houses. Some people would say, I want lots of stairs because I was deprived of stairs in an apartment, meaning, they would take the elevator up and, go to their one-floor living. They didn't like the one-floor living. So it's really diverse. Yeah.
The first time we took my nephew and niece to the United Kingdom, to the south of England, when we arrived, and it was a 3-story house, they played on the stairs for about 6 hours. They just played on the stairs because they weren't used to stairs. They certainly not in a private space. Of course, they're used to stairs in schools and, shops and things like that. They've seen stairs before and used them, but stairs in the house that you can play on, how many steps can you jump? Can you slide down them? And I completely agree with this idea of being deprived of stairs almost. And when in our first family house, in my wife's family house, it was fascinating, Juhee, because before we were married, I wasn't allowed in the house. And once we were married, I was allowed in and to become sort of almost not the king of the house, but could do what I want. And there's many bedrooms, but only one bedroom had a bed. And I was allowed to sleep in that, and everyone else, they got out their blankets. Right. And it wasn't only sitting on the floor and not the sofa, but it was also sleeping on the floor. They would do this sort of 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And it's interesting to me how that culture is slowly changing, I think. We have more and more Koreans sleeping on beds, now sitting on sofas, relaxing on sofas. It's becoming, I don't want to say it's becoming westernized. It's almost sort of becoming new Koreanized, something like that. But it's really changing here.
Oh, yes. And that, speaking of bed, this was also another fascinating thing. They would have the bed, but they didn't like the softness of the bed, so they would put like a very hard plank.
That's Korean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hard pillows as well.
Right. Hard pillow.
Have these, like, I want a big fluffy pillow or something like this. And many Koreans, I'm generalizing here, they have this kind of hard thing that they will sleep on as a pillow. And I forget what it's called. I don't know why we're talking about sleeping, but a nampion or a namdati. I forgot what it's called.
Right. It was translated as
something like a
summer wife.
Yes, that's
summer wife, because they would wrap their body on this like a woven bamboo a pillow, which was not soft at all, but it aerated, like it circulated air as you were sleeping. Yeah.
It's very clever, isn't it? That's obviously traditional and people used it for those reasons. My children this summer, they had sort of like cooling ones that had this cool fabric over that would remain really cool. So it was taking the traditional idea of this kind of hollow, because it had holes in, didn't it? This kind of like lover pillow, this long vertical thing that you would wrap your legs around. Now they've done it with this kind of cooling material as well. So our children have that. They wrap themselves up in.
Fascinating. Yeah, I also love that story of your children playing the stairwell. And yeah, it's like a new newfound play space, right? Yeah, newfound experience. That's great. Yeah.
And it's good, I think, if house is a home or a place to play, not just to sleep and to go to work again the next day, but it is a space, and it's something that we need to do with that. You're going to Jeju.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Any thoughts on sort of Jeju? Feels very different to me, Juhee. I'm not sure if you've been there recently, but when I go to Jeju, parts of it feels like southern England to me, with stone walls and horses in the field and things like this. And
yes, it is a different place, right? I heard that long ago. I don't know exactly how many or what year, but so Jeju used to be the land of exile because it was such a harsh environment, volcanic rocks and such. So it was very hard to survive there, and that's how our family was rooted. And that's actually another interesting point on my journey 25 years ago, is that I went to this very revered place in Sosaewon, called Sosaewon, and that's when I realized that so Sosaewon was built as a result of Kim Yo-sawa, one of the literary purge, which killed a scholar, Cho Gang-jo, and so long story short, the owner of Sosaewon had fled, that scene, but during that time, my great-great-grandfather of many generations ago was exiled to Jeju Island. So I learned that on my journey there, and so Jeju Island was a land of exile, but ironically, then turned into land of honeymooners in 1980s or 70s because Koreans were not allowed to travel abroad during military dictatorship. So it was like a subtropical island, and so it became like Korea's getaway island. And for us, for our family, we have a lot of tragedies, like the massacre, different form of massacre that Korean government has inflicted on its own people. And this is actually death of my mother was kind of indirectly related to that because of certain prejudice, that the Korean government had. It's a long story. So Jeju Island is a very interesting place now, like many notable buildings, modern architecture is coming in, and it's culturally, it's becoming sophisticated. Yeah.
Surfing and tourism, but also the dark history and all of that. When we started this conversation, and in the build-up to the conversation, when we were talking to each other, Juhee, you mentioning this idea of Puri and resolving, and just hearing you talk about your mother and her passing, your grandmother, grandfather and the exile. This question might sound perhaps wrong, Orientalist perhaps, but does Korea seem a more emotional place to you? I don't know, but it feels like it's driven by emotion, by stories, by these. What's your take on the emotion of Korea?
Yes. I was just meeting with Moon-hoon, the architect, and he said Koreans, even he, observed how Koreans just they're so emotional. They have to cry, they purge it out, and then they get back on the horse, and as if nothing happened, and they'll keep going until the next incidents of emotional outburst. I definitely observed that as well. And as the 점쟁이, the fortune teller, told me that just admit it, I would cry one minute and then I'll be laughing another minute, just very emotional people.
Tell me something about Moon-hoon.
Moon-hoon is a fascinating modern architect in Korea. He went to Australia for, I believe, 2.5 to 3 years because his father was studying. His father was expanding his studies in. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out on his father. His family grew up in a rural part of Korea, which I have a hard time memorizing that name, but it's where tungsten was mined in, I think, 70s and 80s. And then when that industry dried up, his father applied to study abroad in Australia, and Eun-hoon went with him, and that's where he was able to really express his creativity, because the teachers let him just explore his drawing. He loved to draw. That was his favorite pastime. And so long story short, he just loved, by nature, he's just a very, very independent, liberated thinker. And boy, I have a long story of how I got to meet him. But he, I believe, really represents the liberated Korea. A lot of people, when they see his work, he started with just drawings, and his drawings are like shamanism meets future, meets organic. Like his drawings sometimes look like sectional cuts of organic living buildings.
Okay.
Space age meets, traditions, and it's just really, really fascinating way out there. And I thought, and his drawings are actually bought by MoMA. That's 4 pieces, I think, so which is very rare. But I thought he only did drawings. But then when I looked up his built work, I mean, they're really fascinating. And he had come to New York to lecture about his work. And because they were so progressive and bright colors and very bold geometries and moves and very, very out there, very progressive. Some of the audience members like, how is this happening? Like, you are actually building. How could your clients let you do this? And what was really fascinating was that I felt, because Korean society can be so suppressive, that some clients actually sought him out so that they could live vicariously, number one. And number 2, that he could design them spaces that would release that tension and have a little more fun in their living spaces, in their houses and buildings. And so I was really impressed that Koreans were actually building progressive buildings. Yeah.
That's the liberated Korea. Yeah, that's wonderful. Have you seen the movie Parasite?
Yes. Yeah.
Architecture features quite a lot in that, and the idea of a famous artist's house, and then the basement and things like that. I'm just curious whether you have any. I'm jumping conversation here, topic a little bit, Juhee, but when you talk about architecture, my mind goes to rich people living in luxurious buildings, which is sometimes very different from the day-to-day life of the average citizen. And here we're thinking about designing spaces that incorporate tradition and modernity. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is it feels like there's a class aspect to it. Not in a negative sense, but
right.
Architecture must also be determined by class. Different classes live in different ways.
There's definitely a class difference. Gosh, this can be a complex discussion, because there's also here difference between the old money and the new money, and how they spend or what they think is a good way to spend their money. And yes, there's definitely a way that the wealthier has more access to architects. Let's see, there's so many ways to go about this. For example, I hear that Korean government also started to hire talented contemporary architects to oversee government projects, for example, so that they will increase the quality of Korean architecture that's accessible by the public. So that was great to hear. And so in terms of house, I think because, whether it's in Korea or United States, I see similar issues where, to build a house, it's just too expensive. Yeah. And so that's why the new culture of homeowners designing and building their own house, like construction managing their own house, has become popular. I think it was very popular, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know the exact timeline, but it was very popular and it has come down a little bit. But I think that need has also created a different industry where a group of professionals consult to homeowners. They will not necessarily draw it for them, or they provide like a guidance where they can get permit drawings, but the homeowners are managing construction. Yeah.
I guess the great irony during all of this is that while we're talking about homes and design and Munhun's progressive, technological, shamanistic things, more and more people around the world seem unable to get a home. And it's not just a Korea problem. The house prices in Korea are outrageous, but it seems to be a global thing. Obviously, Juhee, you're not going to solve those problems, but having lived through various decades like myself, do you have any observation on this? Because homes used to be something that we would live in for a long time. It used to be sort of a generational thing, and you work at the post office and save up and you could buy a home for your family and that would be it. That idea seems to be changing almost, or it seems to have been a little bit lost across general society.
Yeah. I think the government will definitely have to step in. That's my sense. And then, like this Korean homeowners taking the matters into their own hands, I think that's very clever and ingenious. And I think, knock on wood, that such creative solutions will foster creativity and more healthier and expressive living. And in Hudson Valley, where we practice architecture, we see for a little bit of investment, they would, let's say, build 2-family homes so that one can be rented and so supplement their cost of building, or they would, partner with friends or families, to build a house together. Yeah, there's definitely that kind of solution. Yeah.
Very good. Perhaps as we draw this towards the end, Juhee, any kind of, I don't know, final observations, comments on Korean architecture and the history and the Hanoks and the Hanyang and the personal connections that you've had to all of this and the bridge. How do you sum all of this up, what you've discovered, what you're writing about?
I guess I am limited by my own exposure and what I've learned along the way. But the funny story is, it was my Jewish American literary agent who pointed this out to me. Because when I sent him my first chapter of my book, he said, "Let me digest," because there's a lot of ideas in this first chapter. And he said, but we really need to hone in Hanpuri. And that was, of course, my journey. I didn't know it then. I just thought that I was just going back to Korea on many different, mixed emotions. And one of the emotion was that educating myself was going to be the sweetest revenge that I can have on my parents. And my father and stepmother. Anyway, so as I'm learning more, that I am feeling that architecture could be Korea's Hanpuri as well. I'm seeing a lot of parallel life, like my personal history as well as Korea's history. Like Korea was so suppressed, Confucianism was so suppressive. I heard that through a friend that before Confucianism, women were much more respected and that had much more freedom, and they would commingle with men. And then, Confucian came and suppressed, and his and her spaces and women's role in society versus men's, and women were not educated, etc. And so there was that suppression, and then Japanese came in and suppressed Koreans even further. While they were not while Koreans were not explicitly prohibited from becoming architects, only very few privileged had the opportunity to become architects, and then the rest really served as draftsmen to Japanese occupation forces, and that is still lingering. My colleagues, Korean architects practicing here, is that part of the reason why they go abroad for architecture is that architecture really falls under engineering school. The creativity, like to really foster creativity among Koreans is really difficult because of that suppressive mentality. History of the suppression is really hindering how architecture is taught in school, how students feel what they're allowed to express. And then, of course, there's architectural clients who come with money. You do as I say, so which is similar in the United States as well. But here I hear the creativity has been suppressed. And so now as Koreans are evolving, of course, they are allowed to be more creative. And I'm sensing such huge explosion of creativity now, but at smaller scale. But what's also interesting, I heard that now that when they see applicants come to architectural offices, that women are showing more talent and a capacity, which is really blew my mind. And so this is like a blind review of the applicants. And then when they see that they have more Korean women qualifying for the position, they have to actually reverse to include some male candidates so that they would have some equality or diversity in the workforce. It's fascinating. So as you know, Koreans, they advance and change so fast. And so I'm really excited to see what the future holds. So I do feel that architecture can also be a form of Hanpuri, for Koreans. Yeah.
And for women as well, particularly, that's really interesting to hear about the success that they're having in that field. And I spoke a little bit, perhaps negatively, about the sort of apartment box living that we see here. But in a sense, thinking back on that, that's also probably liberated women in the sense that now they're able to find their own space, have their own independence, and find 1 rooms or 2 rooms. They don't need to live with the larger family. And so in a sense, for some people it might be alienating, but for other people it might be that liberation, that freedom to create their own space. And then foster their own dreams and change the world, quite literally, actually, in architecture as they see fit. I think that's wonderful. And
yeah.
two things you said I think are really interesting. Korea always changes. Anything you can say about Korea 10 years ago might not be true today and might not be true in 10 years' time as well. It's a conservative country, yes, but it's so fluid in terms of, I'm sure you've probably noticed it, the amount of tattoos and crop tops and things like this is not it doesn't look that conservative anymore.
Right,
to me. Yeah.
right. So, they're definitely changing quickly. What you mentioned about the apartments liberating women, I think that's very true, but that touched upon my memory when I was studying here 25 years ago. The professor, Hwang Do-jin, was very progressive in terms of, like, let's really look at gender issues in Korean architecture. And he had mentioned how that apartments really got rid of sarangche, the men's quarter. And then, so it was really about, there's bedroom for, the parents, and then there are bedrooms for the kids. But because house was such a sanctuary for the children's, let's say, schoolwork. Yes, they go to hagwon, but when they come home, they're still studying, right? And so then they needed to focus, and then therefore the men felt like there was no room for them, and so then they would roam the street, and so that was his observation. So it was very interesting, phenomenon. Yeah.
I've also heard about the molecules and the fine particles in kitchens that have affected women's respiratory things over the 70s, the 80s, the height of sinks being certain designed for women's heights rather than men's heights, and all of these sort of incorporated ways of dividing people before there were dishwashers and things like this, the modern conveniences that we enjoy.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Do you have any recommendations for us, Juhee? Any books, any movies? It doesn't have to be related to architecture or Korea, but dramas, books, movies, songs.
Let's see. Books are hard for me to pinpoint. I mean, I know in books there are some picture books on Korean architecture, but but what really struck me recently was that by pure accident, chance, I was listening and reading two books at the same time. One was The Birth of Korean Cool by Yoon Hee-hong, and the other one was Without You, There Is No Us by Suki Kim, which is a little bit of older book. And to listen and read these two books simultaneously was mind-bending, mind-boggling. I don't know what the right word is, because it really expressed the two very extreme way of looking at life or living life in Korea and North Korea, that I thought that everyone should read these books simultaneously, interchanging, to understand, how Koreans think and live, and just, I thought it was very, very fascinating. And then in terms of movies, there's so many great films, and I just wish I had access to all of them. But one that, and just right now, just lack of time, I have very limited exposure to Korean films. But one that really stayed with me, that I saw long ago, was called The Age of Success. And it was 성공의 시대, was released in 1988. And that really expressed Korea's drive, to succeed. And the movie, it was done in 1988 at the height of, like Seoul Olympic and all of that. And the producer, I guess, director, the writer, the team who made this movie was predicting the consequences of Korea's success. And I thought it was really brilliantly done. Yeah, and that is available. The full film is available on YouTube. I think it's called like a Korean classic film channel. Yeah.
That sounds brilliant. I haven't even heard of that one, I must confess. So that sounds something like I should go and watch. Yeah, brilliant. Juhee, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.